Hey, welcome back to another episode of Remarkable Rare Living with Shprintzen-Goldberg Syndrome, also known as SGS. My name's Kayla,
And I'm Zohan.
and if you're new here, we're two students from the University of Notre Dame who are interested in raising awareness about rare diseases, and we're specifically interested in SGS. So today we're highlighting just different mothers to really learn more about the community around SGS, and we'll hear more from Tina and Katie, who are mothers and primary caregivers of their children with SGS.
Right. So, first, to start it off, we'll have Tina present her perspective, her experiences with SGS. So, if you would please, Tina.
So during pregnancy, everything was typical. Really until he was born, we were all kind of shocked because we were expecting a typical baby. Um, the last little bit of the pregnancy, I ended up having to be induced, and then that took too long a period of time. So then we did emergency C-section. So when he was born, he had very little muscle tone and went straight into the NICU. He had to be resuscitated. And so from that point on, we started having, he immediately couldn't eat. That was our first wondering what's going on, plus the muscle tone. And he had a very misshapen head, but we didn't know if that was from the long birth process, that kind of stuff. So they did bring in a geneticist who evaluated him in the NICU. They ran a couple of blood tests and nothing came back positive on that. So he stayed in the NICU for about 6 weeks. We ended up going home with a feeding tube because during that time we tried numerous bottles and whatnot and couldn't figure out why he couldn't eat on his own. We identified a malrotation of small intestines at 5 days old. So he had his first surgery then to correct that. Um, then at 6 weeks, we finally got to go home and we did a follow-up visit with the geneticist 3 months after that. And she basically talked about different syndromes that she was looking at for Alan, and wasn't 100% positive what we were seeing. She did suspect and brought up Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome and showed me some pictures from a textbook. But she was going to meet with a larger group of doctors to discuss his case. So I would say, I think it was at our next follow-up 3 months later. So at 6 months, she clinically diagnosed him with Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. Then, we just continued on the path of all the different challenges that come up along the way. I want to say it was probably 3 years later. His geneticist retired, so we got a new one. And he completely agreed with her clinical diagnosis of Shprintzen-Goldberg. So I believe he was 3 years old when a blood test became available. And so we went ahead and did the blood test, and they came back saying that it's positive for Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. You learn a lot about medical stuff. I had no idea there were so many different types of specialists in the world. It's just every day is really a learning process. You have your very emotional moments, your like super happy moments when they finally meet a milestone. We all just are here for Alan, and we do everything we can for him to help him have the best life possible. Sorry, I always get emotional when I talk about him.
Well, thank you, Tina. I really thought that one important thing from your journey was that the similarity with hope. Like when we talk about SGS and it being ultra rare, it's typically like thought that it has a large variation. But like in these two cases, you really see that there's this general trend throughout the disease. And like with this, there's hope that, you can study it and really develop the idea of the general trend of how this disease will happen.
Exactly, and just knowing that, you know, there's stages that, are similar to others and stages that are different is just so important. So thanks for sharing that. So yeah, what would be your most important community resources?
For the longest time, I couldn't find anything out there. Um, and then I ran across this Facebook group, and that's really the only resource that I have. And they're fantastic. Everybody's open to sharing their experience, what they've been through. We all ask questions when we're in an unknown situation, and I'm so thankful I found the Facebook group. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I researched online and there was nothing in the area, and nothing specific to what Alan was going through. The closest thing we could find was Marfan syndrome. And it just seemed like, although there's a lot of similarities there, it was very much different than what we were going through. So,
Okay, so that's huge because before she had a diagnosis, the first 7 months of her life, I just felt like we were chasing a rabbit hole. Like we were going down because we didn't know, we were going down so many different directions just to try to find some commonality with people. We only went 7 months, and being in the dark and not having support from doctors, um, you know, they did the best they could, but they didn't know what they were dealing with. They couldn't say, here's a support group, go find them. So the real light at the end of our tunnel really came when we got the diagnosis, and I found a Facebook group, because you just Google Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. You don't even know how to spell it. But yeah, you find it, and the first thing that pops up, was this Facebook group. So I joined that. That's how I met Melissa. I've met so many other amazing families, and they've really been a compass for us throughout all these years. So where if we have a question or if we have a concern, we go on that Facebook group, and it's connected so many of us. I don't know how many times I've been to a doctor and I've, with permission, showed photos from another child, or been like, so and so is experiencing this. Can we please check for this? So a lot of what we're walking through right now medically with Elise is because I know what to expect based upon what other children have been through. That if I hadn't known, we wouldn't even be looking for that, And so I want Elise and us to be able to uh, help provide that roadmap for other families just being diagnosed.
Well, it seems like Facebook is just such a useful tool for a lot of the small communities, and Melissa talked about how life changing just being able to have a small group like that was, and just to hear from Tina, that's how you guys were able to connect. It just shows like really, sometimes it is social media platforms that work best.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think, I'm not too much of a social media user myself, but seeing this, it's like social media could actually do a lot of good.
Yeah, and I think it's like really there's a huge network of just online users, and it's just so nice to be able to have that community page that's specific for SGS. And with something so small, that sometimes is the most that you can get. So it's really important to be able to hear and find these real people, real community. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Right. So moving on, next we'll hear more about Katie's perspective. So once again, to start it off, we'll have Katie share her journey. So take it over, please, Katie.
Well, it's funny now because I meet parents of children with SGS, and they get a diagnosis, if not in the hospital, just months after their child was born. And when we had Elise, it was so strange that doctors didn't know what they were dealing with and what this was. And so I had done my research, because you have a baby and you know that there's something going on, but you don't know what. And I just went to Google, and I Googled and found lots about Loeys-Dietz and Marfan syndrome that would fit the description of Elise, but not quite. And so we just did a bunch of genetic testing after she was born, and when she was around 7 months, we got the actual diagnosis that it was Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. So I wasn't far off, you know, because it's so close to Marfan's syndrome. So yeah, but she was a baby. She was a baby when we got the diagnosis, and it was so helpful in kind of giving us a roadmap of, okay, now what do we do? You know, what doctors do we see? What treatments is she going to need? What do we need to look out for? Because we didn't know, you know, when she was first born. So we saw so many specialists just trying to figure out what is this. The initial genetic testing that we did, you know, that test for, you know, just kind of everything like Down syndrome came back normal. So I remember them calling me with the genetic results that they initially took on her, and them saying it came back normal. And I was like, how is that possible? There has to be something going on. That's when we saw a geneticist, and we did, I believe it's called the microarray testing, just kind of test for everything. And that's when it came back that she had a mutation in her ski gene. And then it pointed to Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome. But I hadn't heard that term ever used before. No doctor ever brought it up as a possibility. And you have to learn how in the very beginning to almost grieve what your life is not going to be. You know, I had this idea of what life was going to look like, you know, and life just threw us a curveball. And so after you grieve, initially you have to accept. And then with the acceptance comes, you know, you can embrace what life had in store. And that was embracing even the hard things.
All right, thank you so much, Katie. So I think for this one, instead of the general trend, you really see a break in that trend, and like this is where the variation of SGS comes in, where you really get like a whole spectrum of severity, spectrum of symptoms, etc. And I think it also is like a nice illustration of like how early diagnosis potentially has the ability to change how the disease occurs. As you can see, like in this case, they got diagnosed much earlier than like Hope, and that like changed the results.
Exactly, and just hearing just about the differential diagnosis as well, knowing that there was something, but having to ponder other things. So that just highlights the importance of just at different stages, there'll be different diseases that will come into play. And that's when you consult the community that you might have access to. And that also shows just how important it is to be able to find that community if you can. Sometimes it's stepping in, okay, hey, maybe I should look into Loeys-Dietz and Marfan syndrome and SGS at the same time if you can. To get that sort of the pre-care and preventative care.
Yeah, I really think the whole ability to like diagnose is like changed so much just in a couple of years. Like if you check out earlier episodes with Hope, it was like you needed Dr. Dietz himself to come in and diagnose it, right? And like that's just a tremendous effort. Yeah. But now, as you see here, it's like much quicker, and like kudos to the geneticists for being able to diagnose it. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't Dietz this time; it was just a other doctor. So I definitely say like physicians have evolved, and just our ability in medicine too.
Yeah, I agree. Healthcare is definitely advancing, and that has its advantages, especially for the rare disease community, who's very reliant on it. And so, Tina, what would you say are just some important things for new families with SGS to know, and other people in general?
Always ask questions is my biggest thing. If you have a resource like our Facebook family, don't ever be afraid to ask questions or share an experience that you're going through. Always ask the doctors questions if something doesn't seem right, or doesn't seem right for your child, because there may be things that they recommend that you just don't think is the right path to take for your kid. Ask about other options. And if you can wait on something and monitor something before you like jump into a surgical procedure or things like that, just take it one day at a time and be as supportive as you can. I always say kids just because we're in childhood, but individuals with rare disease just really want to be seen as a typical person. They want to be able to do and be the same and not be stared at and left out of things. They're capable of doing a lot of things that just need a little bit of a modification for them to be able to do what everybody else is doing. And so not to leave them out. And that when you see somebody that's different, you should talk to them, ask them questions. I get a lot of times when we're like in waiting rooms, parents will say, stop staring. Um, when I would rather they encourage their child to come over and talk to my child.
Great.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank
I'm
you.
usually not this emotional, but I am always when talking about Alan, mainly because I'm just so proud of him. And to find ways to ask the questions in a not hurtful way. I've had parents come up to me and say, what's wrong with him? And I'm like, nothing's wrong with him. This is the way he was intended to be.
Yeah.
But if you're asking what his diagnosis is, and then I'm, more willing to talk to them. But I think that they just don't. It's just like I have a similar issue where I don't know how to respond to some children that come up and will say something. They're curious, they're asking questions, but it comes across in a very harsh manner. And I don't know what they're capable of understanding to try to explain to them. And but I get that kids, they don't really understand, but I think that's because we don't explain that enough to our children. On nice ways to ask our questions instead of they're just so blunt.
Thanks for sharing, Tina. I think it's so important, just what you mentioned about being curious, and knowing as an outsider, you shouldn't be afraid to, just introduce yourself and learn more. That sometimes is the best way to educate yourself and become more aware of just new rare diseases and just how isolating that it can be to have a rare disease, and especially an ultra rare disease in general with the lack of resources. It's so important to know, and pass that advice on to families with how to be equipped with the resources that you can find, and the best way to find the community there.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think the like asking questions and being curious is just so important. Like honestly, for me at the beginning, like before I started this class and like getting involved in rare disease, like I wouldn't say I was the most comfortable like approaching people that had rare diseases or figuring out what they had or understanding what they're going through. But like thanks to Kayla and just like this program, I was like introduced to like this whole world of rare diseases, and now like through being curious and being willing to learn about it, I've become much more comfortable with it. And I think it's like important for other people to understand that's how you develop this process.
Right, and especially there, sometimes it can be misconstrued, as potentially being rude or, just, being a person with judgment. But I think, especially what you mentioned, Tina, in showing your perspective, it does mean a lot because when you approach it with genuine interest and kindness, I think that's sort of when the curiosity, is really needed and appreciated from just communities that really do want other people to wish they know, what they're going through and wish they knew more. So.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I would like to move on just to Katie's perspective. So, like, same question basically. Like, what are some advice or things you wish new families with SGS or other rare diseases knew, or just people in general?
I would say your life is going to change, and that's okay. It's okay. I was sharing earlier that No mama when she's pregnant with her baby is daydreaming about having a child with a rare disease. Nobody laying on that sonogram table, looking at a sonogram of her baby for the first time is just there hoping my child's going to come out with a rare disease. But we live in the world that we live in. And I think that hearing a diagnosis like that at first can just turn your world upside down, and to allow yourself to be disappointed and not feel guilty. I remember feeling like I had to grieve this. I had to grieve this. And I felt guilty for grieving it because I loved her so much. I'd never send her back in a million years. And I knew that there was a purpose for her life, but to allow myself a space to sit in it. And then you get up, you dry your eyes, and you see beyond the diagnosis, and you see the potential, you see what life can be, you see the joy and the happiness that they bring to you, the growth that they bring to you. I'm not the same person I was before I had Elise. My children wouldn't be where they are without Elise. And I would say, find your people. That doesn't have to be a group of 100 people. Your people could be that one friend. Your people could be that one, nurse that walks you through everything. There's nothing like that first, I want to say, year, and maybe 3 years after getting a diagnosis, after having a child born with a rare disease. And it can feel so isolating and so lonely. And so, yeah, just to find people to support you and to uphold you. My family's been the biggest support. I think when people hear the word rare disease, they might have just this picture in their mind. When I hear the word disease, the first thing in my mind is I think of germs and viruses and just crippling effects. And maybe we need to change the way we view disease. And I don't quite know how to do that other than show our children's faces. And is this a face of someone who's diseased and who's a leper and who doesn't have a life and who's miserable? No, my child can live a vibrant, full, happy life having a disease. And knowing just because you might be delayed doesn't mean you're denied. And so, yeah, I want strength to be seen in our weakness. I'm not here to say we have a disease, but we're going to rule the world. No, we have a disease and there's some limitations here. There are some things that we've been denied or delayed in, that can't happen right now. And teaching my daughter that that's okay.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Katie. And it was really interesting that you mentioned the whole view on disease and how, for us, when we think of a disease, maybe like COVID or something, it's like something you want to avoid the person. You don't really want to get close to them. You don't want to catch that disease, right? But for rare disease, this is really kind of misconstrued. The connotation is not right because for these people, they're already very isolated because of their disease, and now because it's a disease, people just want to avoid them. But that leads to the whole isolation thing Tina was talking about. So yeah, what you mentioned of changing that connotation with the word disease, I think is really important because for this case, it's not really that kind of disease, and it's actually better if you get close and get to know these people because that improves their lives, and it honestly improves your lives. I know for a fact our lives improved because we got involved with this.
No, exactly. And just the connotation of words, the language that we use is just so important. And being able to recognize, okay, well, maybe this word might not be the best to explain what this disease is. Maybe it creates more isolation is so important. And that's such a interesting perspective and thing to change is how we view disease. How is there something that we could possibly rename rare disease to make it perceived in a different light and more welcomed? So really great point that you made, and hopefully maybe in the future some people will change the way that we view diseases and rare diseases. Well, it was so great just meeting both of you, Tina and Katie, and just taking the time to share your perspectives as members of the Shprintzen-Goldberg syndrome community and sharing your insights. So we really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your experiences today.
Well, thank you both. And now we've come to the end of the podcast. So thank you, viewers or listeners, and we hope that you've learned something today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.